I'm Wolf Blitzer in Washington. Once again, we want to welcome our viewers here in the United States and around the world to help sort all of these important issues out. And there's a lot going on today. Let's bring in our Chief National Security Correspondent, Jim Sciutto, our CNN legal analyst, Laura Coates, CNN political analyst, David Gregory, our CNN political reporter, Tal Kopan. All of them are here with us. And Jim Sciutto, let me start with you, because on the very important issue of the new travel ban that is about to be announced, there were several important questions about rhetoric, statements the president as a candidate had made that potentially could complicate implementing round two of this travel ban.
That's right. What Sean Spicer's trying to do, and clearly the White House strategy with this amended travel ban, is to make it just about vetting from countries that have vetting problems, not making it about Muslims coming from those countries. And just as a reminder, these are Donald Trump's words when he announced this during the campaign, December 2015. First of all, the title was Donald J. Trump's Statement on Preventing Muslim Immigration. Pretty broad there. The first line, Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. So that's what he said during the campaign. That's on the record. Since then, and even since the election, he started to focus it more on terror, keeping the country safe. And you heard Sean Spicer saying this is just about countries that didn't have proper vetting. So the question is, do the courts accept that quite remarkable pivot from the initial public statements? And we know that in the Ninth Circuit case, they mentioned Donald Trump and his surrogate statements on the campaign trail. Does this meet the legal standard? Does it get over those legal questions? That's for the courts to decide. I will note that there has been a continuing contradiction among Donald Trump's advisors here, because Stephen Miller, he was quoted on the air just a short time ago speaking to Martha McCallum, that the changes in the new executive order were, in his words, going to be minor and technical. So if they're minor and technical, but Sean Spicer is claiming that it's a whole different thing. It's not about the Muslim faith. It's actually about vetting. Listen, it's going to be for the courts to decide whether they think that's what's actually on paper.
And legally, Laura, you're a legal analyst. We did learn that the new travel ban has been completed. They're now going through how best to implement it to make sure that the due process, presumably, requirements are fully met, which they weren't met the first time around. But this issue of a Muslim ban, that rhetoric that the president, as candidate, delivered during the course of the campaign, how much of a problem potentially is this in getting round two approved by the courts?
It's a huge problem. If due process is your minor technical point, you've got a really big uphill battle in terms of what you're thinking about here. Remember, the court made very clear, they gave a blueprint in the Ninth Circuit that essentially said, listen, we don't believe in the smoke and mirrors. If this is simply a pretext for the discrimination against Muslims, it violates the First Amendment of the Constitution, which is not what you can turn off and on if you're the president of the United States based on, unfounded or perhaps just a bald assertion of national security. So they're going to have to combat really two things. Take away that minority religious preference, which really violates the Establishment Clause, and also figure out a way to provide some clarity for the court that says there is a reason why the existing vetting measures that we currently have in place are insufficient with respect to these 7 countries. If it's because of your campaign rhetoric, that is not going to pass constitutional muster.
Sarah Murray, our White House reporter, is in the briefing room right now. Sarah, another important issue came out, reports that the White House is micromanaging all the various cabinet departments and agencies, vetting individuals that a secretary may want for a senior position to make sure that those individuals didn't say or do anything contrary to the president's policies, didn't say anything negative about the candidate who was running.
That's right, Wolf. And we do know that this is a president that has been preoccupied for a long time about the notion of loyalty, and he takes any criticism very personally. And we've seen that playing out as these cabinet secretaries are trying to staff their various agencies, that there has been concern coming from the White House about potential people filling these political appointee slots who have been critical of the president in the past. Now, White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer downplayed this today, basically saying, of course, if we are looking at political political appointees. We want to look at people who are supportive of the president and who are supportive of his priorities. But Wolf, as you know, there were a number of Republicans, people that might be well qualified for these jobs, who weren't necessarily supportive of Donald Trump early on in the campaign, especially when we were looking at roughly a dozen candidates in this race. And one of the concerns we've been hearing at the agency level are worries that you will not be able to fill all of these slots with people who are properly have the proper level of experience if you're only looking at people who were supportive of Donald Trump from day one. Now, the White House, again, I said, is very dismissive of this concern. They basically said anyone who is going to fill a political appointment should be on board with Donald Trump and his policies 100%. Wolf.
Yeah, that's an important point indeed. Our Sarah, stand by. David Gregory, on the issue of the town halls that Republican members of the House and Senate are now facing, some of them becoming rather loud. A lot of protests going on, citizens in their districts complaining about various aspects. We did hear from Sean Spicer say, in response to a question, there seems to be, in his word, a hybrid. Some people are legitimately upset. They have every right to do so. But some of this is manufactured, and there's a lot more noise than there is. There seems to be a lot more noise than there seems to be specific issues. In other words, it's directed from the outside.
Well, I think that's largely true. I don't think the manufactured part is true, but the fact that you have some districts where you have loud resistance, organized resistance that is similar to the Tea Party, which is that it is coming organically, this time from progressive circles, and in some cases being brought in from outside of the district to make a lot of noise, to get a lot of media attention, and to be disruptive. I mean, that's what the Tea Party was in large measure, and it's also taking on big questions about, are Republicans going to resist the president in areas where progressives and middle-of-the-roaders think that they should on issues like health care? You know, we're getting, and I thought we heard from the press conference today, from the press briefing, a lot of policy discussion now that's unsettled policy discussion. This whole debate about Obamacare is not going to go well because it's going to be messy and it's going to be hard. And just as it was when President Obama pursued it, it's going to be contentious. And that's what I think those town halls are legitimately reflecting.
You know, Tal, the president earlier, before this press briefing, he had a photo op with his Secretary of the Treasury, his budget director, others involved, basically insisting the whole budget right now is a mess. He used that word, is a mess. But he did say, and we did hear from Sean Spicer, that maybe by early to mid-March, some new proposals for health care would be released and some new specific budget decisions would be released as well. But he repeatedly, the president did, refer to the whole process right now that he has inherited as a mess.
Yeah, and I'm sure now that he's actually looking at it up close, it might look like a mess. And, you know, folks on Capitol Hill are sort of waiting with bated breath to see what they get, you know, if we have this March deadline. But there are a lot of things in the budget that Trump has spoken about in sort of contrary to Republican ideological ways. You know, for example, he wants to have this sort of massive border security plan. We're going to build a wall. We're going to hire 15,000 people minimum plus detention centers. I mean, there's some very big ticket items. We're not even talking yet about an infrastructure plan. And yet at the same time, Mick Mulvaney, his new budget chief, is one of the biggest budget hawks that could come out of Congress. And there's a lot of questions about how those two different ideas are going to resolve themselves. And I think people are going to be watching this budget process very closely to see which side of the party Trump seems to go with.
And who's going to pay for a lot of that,
yes.
Isn't it interesting, Wolf, if you take the larger view, the only thing that's been particularly well done from an organizational point of view is Judge Gorsuch. Now, that was a hornet's nest because of how the Republicans handled Judge Garland and that whole confirmation process. But that was teed up well, it was organized, all the traps were hit before he got going. The president could have been in a position to roll out some things on tax reform and infrastructure. He could have gotten that ball rolling with Congress a lot more seamlessly. Hasn't done it yet. Hasn't been organized. And this focus on immigration has been both incredibly divisive, but also not well organized. This is the chaotic part of the administration.
Jim, the Secretary of Homeland Security, Secretary Kelly, the Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, they're going to be meeting with the Mexican leadership. They're on their way to Mexico right now. They should be arriving in Mexico City shortly. And there's been various descriptions of what their mission is right now. Clearly, there are some serious strains because of the president's repeated assertion that the U.S. is going to build this border wall and Mexico will pay for it.
That's right. Apparently, Kelly and Tillerson are going to go there and propose that Mexico detain non-Mexicans crossing the border. Of course, a burden for Mexico in light of already the accusatory language, to say the least, used by the president regarding the immigration issue. You had Sean Spicer there say, in his words, we have a very healthy and robust relationship with the Mexican government. I believe that Mexico would echo that. I wonder, certainly in public, some strains have, you might say, leaked out, particularly about paying for the wall. So we'll see if Tillerson and Kelly had a long history working with the Mexicans as chairman of Southern Command, where border security is an issue. So he's been partners with them in the anti-drug war, et cetera. Do those personal relationships, Tillerson's well-known diplomatic skills, does that get over this enormous hump created by the president? Remains to be seen. And it should be noted that ask that they're going with is a pretty dramatic ask to make of someone that you're having not the warmest relationship right now. Yeah.
On another sensitive issue, Laura, the issue of transgender bathrooms. The press secretary was asked a few times, what is the administration's stance on this? Does it differ from the Obama administration? He said further guidance would be released later today. But explain to our viewers the issue right now, because it is a sensitive issue for the Department of Education.
It is. And what happened is about a couple of years ago, you had this issue of the Fourth Circuit of a student in Virginia named Gavin Graham who was trying to use the bathroom of the sex he identified with. And you had the president issuing guidance saying, listen, I'm going to assist the public schools around the country to figure out how we should sensitively treat people who are transgender, especially in the schools. And the Civil Rights Division backed them up. And the Department of Education backed them up and essentially said, Title IX guards against sex discrimination. I know we didn't talk about gender identity being sex, but it's the same thing when we're talking about protecting people. Therefore, the guidance we're going to issue will have that. Well, the Supreme Court is now going to hear the case March 28th because the Fourth Circuit said, well, we're going to rely on the President Obama's guidance at that time. So if Trump then reverses that guidance, even if it's for benign reasons, which he suggests that it is, the court may send it right back to the lower courts and say, because you relied on that guidance, it no longer exists. This will be a very lengthy court procedure and really will be an affront to the civil rights progress that's happened for the LGBT community.
Because you did hear Sean Spicer say the president is a strong believer in states' rights.
Right.
And that's going to be a sensitive issue as far as this Supreme Court decision potentially is concerned.
It will, because the real issue is whether or not this is the federal government who has a role in deciding what should be the local policies for schools, or is this a states' right issue, which will be a constant battle between federalism and in different administrations. So that's what the theory is, but when it comes down to it, Title IX does guard against sex discrimination. Gender identity is about sex discrimination. It's not a federalism issue. It's really a civil rights issue.
And we remember the uproar that happened in North Carolina as a result of the decision there by the governor. All right, the ex-governor, I should say. Everybody stand by.